My name's Roger Saunders. I am University Teaching Fellow and Associate Professor here at the Montfort University in Leicester, UK. And I'm going to talk you through what is required of the assessment for uh, Marketing Essentials. So, first of all, you are required to choose an industry within which to base your notional business. Now, the suggestion is that it should come from the following four industries: tech, fashion, leisure and tourism, and food or drink. But you might want to look at something outside of that. And if you do, then please speak to your module tutor to ensure that it's an appropriate industry to look at. Your notional business then needs to have a brand logo and a slogan, and you need to think about how it will differentiate itself from competitors within that particular industry. Remember, when you're talking about an industry, you need to focus down onto a specific aspect. So, for example, if you were looking at tech, an example of a tech industry might be mobile phones. Or if you're going to talk about fashion, then you might talk about fast fashion. In terms of leisure and tourism, you might think about cinema as an industry. Or with regards to food and drink, perhaps it would be fast food, or it might be something more specific like a type of restaurant. Once you've done that and you've created your brand will need a logo and a slogan, and you'll also need to think about how you're going to differentiate that brand from its competitors, bearing in mind that differentiation is often a very subtle thing to actually convey. So in some cases, the thing that makes your brand unique may be something which is genuinely unique to your brand, i.e., your brand has that specific function or capability or attribute where no other brand within that particular category does. On the other hand, you might be choosing from a category where there is very little difference between various different types of product. And in that particular instance, what you're going to be doing is creating a brand identity that people might buy into. So if you think about the difference between, say, Nike and Adidas, in technical terms, whilst they have different products, there may be very little to choose between the trainers of one brand and the trainers of another. But what those brands actually stand for is identified then through their slogans. In the case of Nike, that would be just do it. And that sums up the brand values rather than focusing on a specific USP for the brand itself. Once you've done that, you then need to answer the 5 questions which are applied to the report, and these are presented as sections. There is a document which will actually lay out how you present this information in terms of it being a business report, and your module tutor will confirm for you which parts of that you need to think about and you need to focus on. But I'm just going to talk about the 5 sections that relate to the 5 pieces of information that you need to present within your report. So the first section is an industry analysis. If you're going to be talking about a particular industry, then you need to think about who the main players are within that market. And it will vary from industry to industry, depending on how specific your product or your service is within that overall industry. So some are very general and some are more specific. For example, if we were talking about the tech industry, we might focus specifically on mobile phones, and then we're going to be talking about the major mobile phone manufacturers. If we were talking about food and drink, we might focus on fast food and talk about the manufacturers within that particular area. Or if you're looking at fashion, you might choose to look at couture clothing, which is more expensive and sort of more intrinsically of high value, as opposed to, say, fast fashion, where much of the focus is likely to be on price as much as any other aspect. So once you've identified who those main players are, you need to be clear that they are genuine competitors. So for example, if I was talking about the automotive industry, so that would be cars, I wouldn't necessarily want to compare, say, the brand Hyundai with the brand Rolls-Royce, because whilst they both produce cars, they produce cars in very different categories. And even for major manufacturers in the automotive industry, people like Ford and Vauxhall, they're actually going to be competing potentially in specific categories within that overall industry. So, for example, you might talk about compact cars. So that's minis and super minis, as opposed to luxury cars or sedans or people carriers or SUVs. And that will make it much easier then for you to talk about who the major brands are in the marketplace that are competing with your own and what the differences are between those specific brands. There are then some examples of the kinds of things that you might want to include. Most of these should be available to you through the various different reports that are available online, whether that's reports specifically from the manufacturers, from trade journals, from consumer journals, or from newspaper articles. But some of it you may find is more difficult. So again, you need to think about how many words you need to provide, what would be the main ways in which you can compare those organizations, and whether or not that information is available. So for example, it should be relatively easy to identify the relative market share of the major businesses operating within any particular category. You might find that there's information available about their financial strength, and if nothing else, you could always try typing in the name of the brand, and then if you put the word corporate afterwards, generally speaking, that will allow you to see their annual report, and that will contain lots of financial information, which will allow you to do a direct comparison. You might find information, statistical information is often available online, for example, from organizations like Statista. Well, they will tell you about differences in terms of units, or perhaps their turnover, so the absolute amount of money that they make, or profit. Or it might be something that's slightly tangential, so something like share value. For example, in the year in which Tesla overtook Honda as the most valuable car brand in the world, they hadn't actually made a profit from selling cars at that point, but their share value had risen so that their overall value of the brand was much greater. I believe that situation may have changed since. And then it's also important to identify what their USP is. Now, again, if there is something that one company offers that another doesn't, that may well qualify as a USP. But where you have lots of brands that are actually very similar, it may still come down to how the brand defines itself and its brand values. And usually that's identifiable through their advertising. So the way in which they advertise their brands, the things that they say about their brands, and in particular the slogan that they use to sum up their brands, may well give you a method or a means of comparing them and also then presenting your own brand in relation to that. The second section is looking at external factors that affect your organization. Now, you may choose to do a SWOT analysis, looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but actually identifying strengths and weaknesses may be slightly more difficult, and particularly for your own business, because clearly it's notional, so you can't actually investigate what they are in reality. But the opportunities and threats should be generally available to you. And a further model which could be applied is then PEST, or any version of PEST. I'm going to talk about PEST because it's the simplest, but you may have PESTLE or PRESTCOM or any variation thereon. So if we're thinking about political, economic, social, and technological factors which affect your organization, again, the first thing that you might want to provide is context. Are you talking on a global basis, or are you talking about something which is geographically specific, whether that's a region of the world, whether it's down to a particular country? Now, in terms of political, economic, social, and technological factors, again, these should be widely available either through industry reports, through consultancy reports, people like KPMG, Forbes, McKinsey, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or through various other articles through trade bodies or newspapers, and in particular, the sort of newspapers that tend to carry more hard news and in particular business news within them. One of the examples of an external factor might be sustainability. And sustainability is likely to affect every single brand in every single brand category, so it's quite a good one to focus on. If you're going to talk about sustainability, then you can talk about sustainability in terms of the manufacturing process. If you're actually producing a product, you can talk about it in terms of distribution. You can talk about it in terms of the makeup of the product itself. Does it contain recycled materials, or the recyclability of the product? So in other words, once it's been used up or beyond continued use, can it then be recycled either through general recycling, or does the brand itself offer some kind of opportunity for that kind of recycling to take place? And there are usually other things which then impact on industries. political things because it may be that a government wants to encourage or discourage people from participating in a particular category. At the moment in the UK, for example, there is a great deal of talk about dealing with ultra processed foods because they're very unhealthy and they contribute to a number of different medical conditions, which then put strain on the health service within the UK. In terms of economic ones, whether it's inflation or specific taxes, try and make sure that they are related directly to the industry that you're talking about and not more general ones that are just going to affect everybody. With regards to social factors, they are more likely to be the things that you identify as trends in the marketplace. So what are consumers interested in? What are the kinds of things that consumers are looking for, and how does that impact on the company? Much like sustainability, technology is likely to affect every industry that you're talking about. Again, whether that's a manufacturing process, whether that's about service delivery, or particularly if you're talking about a tech business and therefore tech brands, clearly the development of those brands and the kinds of things which are being made available to consumers which perhaps weren't available before. Section 3 is then about the motivations of consumers. So you need to think about, one, why do consumers buy from the various categories that are available? And then secondly, what are the things that they look for within those particular categories? And that may vary from consumer group to consumer group. So if we think about technology in terms of things like laptops and tablets, for example, think about the criteria that you might apply if you were looking to buy, let's say, a new laptop. Okay, that might be about battery life, it might be about screen size, it might be about some other kind of functionality. If I was looking at myself as an individual consumer, then one of the things that is important to me when it comes to buying things like laptops is number of USB ports. Unlike many people, I don't use cloud services. I still play things from CDs or want to burn CDs, and I don't like the touchpad, so I have a mouse. So the number of USB ports is important to me because there are lots of peripherals that I'm going to want to plug in. You'll also need to think about the nature of the target audience. And whilst we can segment using the standard segmentation criteria, I think the two which are most important to focus on are the psychological aspects of segmentation. So psychographic segmentation, where it's about how do we interact with the brand? How important is the brand to us? Is it a high involvement brand or a low involvement brand? And how do we feel about it? Are we loyal to this brand, or is it the kind where we might change from one brand to another with very little thought given to that? And also behavioral segmentation. So in other words, how is something used? How often is it bought? On what occasions is it bought? So for example, if you're buying something for yourself, you may be applying different criteria in that choice to if you were buying exactly the same thing but as a gift for someone else. In section 4, I want you to think about the marketing mix of your particular brand. So at a very basic level, that's price, product, place, promotion. If you're doing a service, you might also want to include people, physical environment, and process. And you need to demonstrate that your marketing mix is going to help you to achieve your corporate objective. So for example, if you just want to sell the most number of something, and that might be one of your corporate objectives, then clearly you would probably want to keep your price quite low. On the other hand, if what you're looking to do is to maximize profit, then you need to find a way to give people a reason to pay more for something. So it offers them facility that they can't get with another brand, or maybe just something that is particularly important to them. And that can be something as simple as reliability. So in other words, we'll pay more for a brand that we recognize, maybe because we feel it's psychologically less risky, and also because the reason why many brands become successful is because they offer a consistency of product or service delivery, and that's really what people are paying for. The last section then is about your communications plan, and we want you to apply a SOSTAC framework. So that includes the current situation, the objectives that you're trying to achieve, what your strategy is to achieve those objectives, what the specific tactics are that you're going to use, and also to think about the actions and the communications that you're going to use.